Yes, as we have seen in various places, regulations turn out to be risk-based. And that's the reason why regulations and risk often go together. That was the case in our course. I mean, we had this full first lecture on regulations/risk. And you can also see it in other places when regulations and risk come together. In fact, come to think of it, I'm not sure what could be other things that the regulations could be based on. And since the current regulations are based on risk, I'm not sure if they will be really changed to be based on something different. So maybe it doesn't matter what else they could be based on. To me, being based on risk is fine. So yeah. Let's live with that. I'll correct, there is a typo. There shouldn't be an I here. Yeah, so regulations are based on risk. If you want, you may try to think what else could you base the regulations on if you find it interesting, but we will not going to have any homework on this. I don't think it would be, not that anybody suggested this as a project, but I think I wouldn't approve a project that would try to look at other things on what regulations could be based on, or if you would like to come up with your own regulations, maybe that's not really something we want to do. You may nevertheless come up with your own concept of operations. So concept of operations are different. I mean, the regulations are not based on any specific concept of operations, but there are lots and lots of concept of operations that have been out. You might have seen it in the UTM lecture. At some point, I was trying to collect all these new conopses that come out, but I guess I lost track pretty soon. And then, of course, the regulations came in, and the regulations became much more interesting, or at least important than conopses. More important than conopses. I mean, I wouldn't say more interesting. Conopses are very interesting. So conopses, any conopsis is not really a recommendation of how things should be, and by no means a mandate. The regulations are a mandate how things should work. But concept of operations is more a description of, well, concepts, description, thoughts, ideas. And there are lots and lots of good ideas in the various conopses. I would say Chorus Conops is one of the most serious endeavor in Europe that has finished, I think, a couple of years ago, but very recently. And now we're developing Chorus X UAM, concept operations for extension for UAM, as already mentioned. Anyway, of course, when regulations are being defined, it's perfectly fine, and that's what people do. They look into conopses and take some of the services, some of the ideas into the regulations, but not necessarily all of them. Anyway, so regulations are not based on conopses. You don't have to learn conopses in order to learn the regulations, but it doesn't hurt to look at conopses. Or if you have a particularly interesting concept or ideas yourself, then, well, write your own conops. That's okay. Unlike writing your own regulations, which nobody would follow anyway. Anyway, so regulations are not based on conopses. As we know, regulations are not based on the type of operation that the drone does. Whatever the business is, well, that's the business of the operator. That's excellent. They the regulators mind their own business and don't care what your business is. Well, they're almost ideally harmonized. There are really minor points between countries, like this minimum age of the drone operator and so on. But at least in Europe, I mean, they're essentially the same. So EASA is the governing body, and moreover, you can get a scenario approved in one country and then approved operations cross-border or in another country. We don't go into those details, but they are in the regulations. So just to cite SORA again, so the methodology is aimed at evaluating, well, safety risk of any class, any size, any type of operation. Doesn't matter what you do, military, experimental, blah, blah. You still may do risk assessment according to SORA. So maybe to summarize, in order to have your operations approved, you have to prove that your risk is low. Nothing less, nothing more that you have to do. Just show that it's safe enough. Now the question is how you can prove that the risk is low. So you know that in order to get approved, you have to prove that the risk is low. And well, here in principle, you have different ways to do it. Of course, SORA is, well, kind of an industry standard. It's in the regulations, and of course all the derivatives like this predefined risk assessment standard scenarios, I mentioned them. So these are kind of simpler risk assessments than SORA itself and standard scenarios. It's just the standard scenarios that you can declare and do your operation. I hope you remember that table we had in one of the lectures. If not, you can see how the approval goes. You can also have the slight US certificate. Anyway, so something that is already in the regulations in SORA and it's a derivative, yes, you can use it and you can get your operations approved. Important, and that is distinction that we made a lot in the course, is that these are qualitative risk assessment methodologies. And of course, we also looked at quantitative risk assessment methodologies. And I'm saying, of course, because we kind of argued why it is important to maintain the equivalent level of safety measured in expected fatality rate, expected number of fatalities per hour of operations. There could be also other KPIs. So I haven't heard that there has been an operation approved just on quantitative risk assessment, but maybe it will be done in the future. Well, maybe by one of you. I don't know. They are not really so different, this qualitative and quantitative risk assessment. As we saw, they both separately look at the air risk and the ground risk. And there are ways in which at least our quantitative assessment, risk assessment tools complement SORA. I was mentioning this cour Risk UAM, very large demonstration in Sweden, where for doing SORA, LFE and other partners are using some of our at least ground risk tools. Well, we don't really have tools for air risk, since I was arguing that air risk is simple, and I will speak about it also today in this set of slides. Anyway, it feels that more interaction between qualitative and quantitative risk assessment methods is needed. If you remember the definition of use-based services, it's a set of services, blah, blah, relying on digital services and automation. And of course, when you're speaking about digital and automation, you speak and think about computers, about something automated, something quantitative rather than qualitative, rather than something that you do with pen and paper that probably wouldn't count as a digital service and automation. And I mean, I'm not the only one saying that it would be nice to add some quantitative methods to SORA and see how they can be married and live together. I mean, Bubbles is one of the projects in CESAR. So I know there are lots and lots of abbreviations. I don't know if Bubbles is actually an abbreviation. They are speaking about these bubbles around drones, you know, how the two drones would each stay in its own bubble, and the bubbles should be intersecting, and so on. So unlike many other projects that usually have some expansion of the acronym or of initialization, where every letter stands for something. I'm not sure that Bubbles has that. Anyway, so CESAR is Single European Sky ATM Research joint undertaking. If you haven't seen it previously, maybe FTL students saw it in TNFL 01, and they may also see it in air traffic management in TNFL 10 that I will be teaching. Anyway, so single SES stands for Single European Sky. That's the initiative that we will have a harmonized and single European sky. A stands for ATM, air traffic management, mostly related to conventional aviation, although the latest editions of master plan for ATM does include drones, and R stands for research. So the CESAR is kind of the undertaking that embraces a lot of research done in Europe on ATM and also including drones. And ER means exploratory research wave number 4. There probably were several waves. Anyway, so one of the projects in this is our exploratory research wave 4, which is running currently. They have a deliverable, and they're proposing quantitative risk analysis, enrich or replace the qualitative SORA. And yeah, I mean, they don't have an answer. I don't have an answer. we try to enhance or enrich or add or merge it with SORA, well, or maybe replace SORA altogether. I don't know, and do the quantitative risk assessment instead of qualitative method. Anyway, they also say that yes, SORA methods, they will be the guideline, but again, you have to improve this qualitative methodology by adding some quantitative aspect to that, and so on. So this RWC is remain well clear. This is essentially they're trying to understand how far the drones should be from one another, this radius R that I was talking about in the slides and videos on UTM-OK project. So yes, they're looking at well, in even more general details, not about bubbles, but in general, if you have really large disks, really large protected airspace zones, as you have also seen in UTM-OK, and as you can imagine yourself, you will be having conflicts or loss of separation very often because large disks are flying around. But the loss of separation is not a big deal because with such a large distance between the drones, they can do local tactical detect and avoid and conflict resolution maneuvers. On the other hand, if you have really small radius, then of course the conflicts will be very infrequent or less frequent than when the disks are large. But if the drones are very close and you have a loss of separation, well, there will be much higher probability of a collision than if the distance is large. And there is a question how to balance these two, what's the optimal radius and so on. And of course, Bubbles is not the only project that looks into that, but there are others who are trying to understand what is this remain well clear, how it should be defined in terms of time or in terms of distance. Again, these are questions not new to aviation industry. There are standards for the aircraft now. We're trying to understand these also for drones. Anyway, that's not the reason I was bringing up bubbles. I was bringing up bubbles as one of these suggestions that, yeah, quantitative risk assessment should somehow go into the SORA or whatever the qualitative methodology that stays there. There are also other things. Yes, I mean, you could have some agent simulation as a risk assessment, for instance, in SORA. Again, agent simulation, agent-based models are quantitative methods, and well, they say integrating, not replacing. So again, without any details, at least not that I know, there are voices that say that we are qualitative assessment is good because anybody can do it, but it shouldn't be the final word, and there are drawbacks. And well, I mean, these are things that I would like to look at in some details in this lecture, speaking about drawbacks of both qualitative and quantitative risk assessment methods. Hopefully in the previous lectures, I gave good credit to both kinds of methods and showed why they are good. And yeah, now let's take a critical look. But again, the disclaimer that I've been doing everywhere is that any method, qualitative or quantitative, is much better than no method. Any regulation is much better than no regulation. Well, let's look at them and try to improve, or at least understand where they are not ideal. So when it comes to air risk, from the quantitative point of view, as I was showing in particular in my slides, but you can also find it in other places, well, the situation is really black and white, 0 and 1. You may go through some airspace, you shouldn't go through some other airspace because there is the risk of collision is too high. So it's really rather the question of airspace availability than understanding the nitty-gritty landscape of where the risk is low, medium, large, and so on. It's really yes or no, available airspace, not available. And in SORA, well, you've seen that air risk is quite complex. I didn't assign a homework, or I didn't really force you to look at the air risk in SORA. One reason is that, again, in my opinion, it's too complex. If you want, you may look at it. I mean, there is a simple tree where you're trying to understand in what kind of airspace you are, and you're answering simple questions like yes or no, and then you arriving in the air risk, initial air risk class from A to D. So it's not super complex, and then there are all these also and other things. But anyway, again, I'm underlining that this is my opinion, that in general, if somebody is flying something, be it a remote pilot or pilot on board, like general aviation or a balloon or something, well, people are generally aware that they are flying things and that there could be risk of collision. That's different from people on the ground. People on the ground are uninvolved and they don't know that somebody else is operating the drone. I'm not sure how bad it is to be surprised versus being unsurprised when you're hit by the drone. But anyway, in the air, at least you understand there may be other flying things, birds, well, drones and others, who may or may not follow the regulations, who may or may not have the ability to follow the regulations. I mean, they, if it is a big airplane flying at high speed, or even if it's not super high, you know, on the approach closer to the ground, yeah, 160 knots, it just may not be able to maneuver and avoid the drone. But still, I mean, both the aircraft and the drone pilots hopefully understand that there are other things. And in fact, in the first edition of SORA, the air risk was quite simple. And somehow in the later edition of SORA, as you may have seen from, may have heard in the video, in the SORA, they said, well, that there were discussions, and of course, aviation professionals had a lot to say about the air risk. I mean, they've been working with it for their whole life. Well, they have added lots and lots of things to air risk in SORA 2.0, the current one. Well, we'll see what happens when or if there is SORA 3.0 and further on. But ground risk, it kind of remains simple. And one reason maybe for why it is simple is because it is a new kind of risk. In the aviation, didn't really care about the debris falling from the sky on the ground, even if hurting people, because it's a catastrophic event already for the first parties who are on board. So again, my feeling is that the ground risk is overly simple, but while it is simple, I was happy to announce, to assign as a homework problem and have you look at least in the initial ground risk, and then the residual risk is not too hard. I mean, intrinsic, this initial is intrinsic, ground risk, whatever the name is. And as we saw, hopefully I argued, the population density is important for the ground risk, but I wasn't able to really find the definition of populated area. So as far as I could see, I mean, I did read through all the regulations, but maybe I missed it. That there is not even a definition of what is populated area, unpopulated area. And if you remember, when determining the intrinsic ground risk in SORA, well, we have these columns corresponding to your vehicle, and then rows corresponding to types of operations, VLOS, BVLS, or populated, unpopulated, and so on, areas. But what is populated? What is unpopulated? I don't think that SORA specifies that. And that's why, at least in our research, we focus more on ground risk, which is, yes, it's a novel topic, needs a lot of attention, and in particular, this really fine-grained understanding of where you want to fly, where you shouldn't fly, in terms of population density. Okay, so still continuing with the air risk, but of course also touching on the ground risk. If you look at SORA, it only looks at the collision with manned aircraft, but not with other drones. Okay, and yes, returning back to this radius of separation between the drones, when two drones are in conflict or when the loss of separation is there. Again, I didn't see the specification of this radius value or whatever, or remain well clear, maybe specified. Okay, if it's not in terms of radius, maybe it would be in terms of time or other types of performance. So yes, I didn't see any specific values, neither for separation between unmanned and manned, neither for separation, nor for separation between unmanned and unmanned, and so on. And that was one of the reasons that we continue to work with the whole range of these separation radius R to understand what can happen for various separation standards. I've seen also many other works who do simulations with different radii and trying to understand how safe the operations are, how well the drones can follow their paths, stay within this bubble, and so on and so forth. Anyway, a lot of work is still needed to understand what's going on for the range of R, and that's what was kind of the motivation for our work in UTM-OK project. Of course, we did it even before the regulations came in, but well, before the regulations also, there were no values for the separation between the drones, and as far as I see, they're still not there. But yeah, if I missed it, and you know the separation radius, and you know how SORA or regulations define population areas, please let me know. That would be interesting to know. Further things in SORA, again, so this is this intrinsic ground risk table that you have hopefully worked with during the homework, or if not, you will have to. It's on the practice exam. I may include it into the actual exam. So it, yeah, it tells you what is the value for this intrinsic ground risk based on the dimensions of the drone and its energy. And well, there do exist drones that have span larger than 1 meter, but energy less than 700 kilojoules. Yes. So where should they go if they have small energy but large span? Into this column or into this column? And I don't know. This is what SORA says. If there is a mismatch between the dimension and the energy, then you should provide substantiation for the chosen column, whether you choose this column or what, or this column. What does it mean, substantiation? I mean, to me, this doesn't sound particularly, automated or digitized to say that it is a digital service and so on. A computer wouldn't know what to do. So yeah, I understand that you can say, well, the typical kinetic energy can be larger, or the characteristic dimension can be smaller, or whatever. But still, I mean, this is kind of too qualitative, too subjective to me, and I would even say that it's ambiguous and maybe incomplete because it doesn't cover all possible drones, all possible vehicles that could operate. And again, you might have remembered from the SORA video that yeah, there was a discussion in JARUS when they were talking about it. Should it be the dimension or the kinetic energy? And then they decided, oh, but that's more or less the same. Well, it's not. And even if it covers or covered all drone models at that particular time, we should be respectful of other manufacturers. In particular, I don't know, racing drones. People could buy drone details, spare parts from all over the world, and make their own drone. Of course, if it isn't certified, it has to go through certain certification procedures and so on. But nevertheless, there could appear drones that do not fit into any of these columns directly. And then, well, I would have to provide substantiation. What is substantiation? How do you bargain with the regulator? I'm not sure. Again, if you have the answer, let me know. Maybe it will appear later. Another thing, another criticism of SORA, and well, this time it doesn't come from me. For a change, it comes from this chorus, so the concept of operations for European U-space. So again, that's one of the CESAR projects, as I mentioned, the one that came up with the concept of operations. So in one of the places, they speak about air risk class, and what they're specifically referring is these columns for, well, the SAIL is assurance integrity level determination, which is the kind of final outcome of SORA. So if you have certain air risk class, okay, residual air risk class, so it's not the initial or whatever intrinsic air risk class, after you have applied all the mitigations, well, you understand that, yeah, you have air risk class C, or maybe things are so bad, your airspace is so bad, so dense, and your mitigations are not good, so on, that your air risk class is D. And then you realize by looking at this column that no matter what you do with your ground risk, so, your intrinsic ground risk could have been large, and then you could have applied lots and lots of mitigations, and your final ground risk could be low. It could be 2. Well, still, your final answer, your SAIL, specific insurance integrity level, anyway, the final answer from SORA will be 6. That's pretty high. So whether your ground risk is high, the final ground risk category is 7, you get SAIL 6, or you do lots and lots of mitigations and really improve your drone or your operations or your surroundings in terms of the ground risk, and you have reduced the ground risk from 7 all the way down to 1, well, still, your final answer doesn't change. And more or less similar things happen in if you have air risk C. Well, again, you can go from 6 to 5 and even to 4, but still, even with 4, it covers the whole range of final ground risk from 5 to 2. Again, so to emphasize, this is the final ground risk. That's also residual air risk. And final ground risk is after you have applied all your mitigations. So what they say is that, yeah, I mean, they say that there is little motivation for an operator to reduce the ground risk. Well, I would say it's really kind of a discouragement. I mean, why would you, as a business, work with reducing the ground risk if it doesn't help you? So yeah, again, a little thing to criticize SORA maybe. Yeah, of course, if you have very high final ground risk, if it's larger than 7, then you have to go into certified category. But still, for the specific operations, yeah, it doesn't take into account a few things. Another thing, which, well, we could see from our own tools for ground risk. So these are the, well, this is the picture from our ground risk tool with which you might have played. I have the link to it from the slides, and I also spoke about it, and it's also on the web page. So yeah, again, as usual, this heat map is the population density in North Shopping. Well, that's how our town is, right? I mean, that's what the population density is. Maybe Lindo is here. Anyway, so here are 2 points and several paths between them. Actually, there are like 8 paths, but many of them are pretty close to each other, so you only maybe see like 4 or 5. And here is this graph that I was showing a lot in the quantitative ground risk assessment lecture that shows the length of the path versus the EFR versus the risk. And this, again, this is the Pareto frontier. So all these paths. So this one, the blue guy which is very long, but has very low risk because it goes over unpopulated areas, and many others, including the one which goes direct. Well, I guess these purple guys, whatever, you can probably hardly see it, especially now with all my annotations. Now let me remove them. Anyway, so there is a whole range of paths, and they have different lengths and different well, ground risks, different EFRs, and in particular here, well, it should slightly go above this point. Anyway, so these 2 are good in terms of the ground risk. So their EFR is smaller than 1 in a millionth. So yeah, these 2 are good as far as ground risk EFR goes, and these are not. But anyway, so this is not my point. My point is that if you only do SORA, if you only look at the qualitative method of risk assessment, all these paths, they are the same. They would probably assign, well, at least the intrinsic ground risk class of 6, because they, well, at least they start in densely populated area and they end in densely populated area, even though some of them, at least this one, goes around for most of the time. But, well, these parts of the path that go through the densely populated area are probably substantial long that, well, their ground risk class will be 6, no matter what the quantitative ground risk of these paths are. So for SORA, all these paths are the same. Ground risk class 6, you probably would want to do some mitigations, whatever, depends on what kind of operations you're trying to approve. Again, SORA doesn't really care that you know that this path has much smaller ground risk, much smaller expected fatality rate than this path, or even smaller than this one. So both of them are kind of approved, but again, no encouragement to look at something else other than, well, just the ground risk class, which is the same for all these paths. Okay, so yet another discouragement for SORA. Now let's go to the high fidelity risk modeling, the quantitative risk assessment methods, and see how good they are, or try to find what may be wrong with them. And one thing that I feel is wrong with them is that they look at this expected fatality rate, the per hour rate, right? So it's number of expected deaths per flying hour, okay? And here is an example. Well, it is artificial, unlike the one on the previous slide. So you have a start and end point, and well, this red path that goes through high population density part, it has a high EFR, high expected fatality rate, because it plows through lots and lots of people. Okay, so high EFR, maybe it wouldn't be approved from the quantitative point of view of risk assessment. Okay, here is another path for you. So what this path does is it starts again at the same point, and then it circles around here for quite a long time. Okay, and after that rushes again through the high population density area, rushes to the same destination. And again, if you calculate the expected fatality rate for this blue path, clear my drawings so that you see the blue, well, it has low expected fatality rate because the fatality rate is per hour, per flight hour. So if this flight spends a lot of time here, so that the flying hours are long, I don't know, maybe this path takes 1 minute, but instead it circulates here for 1 hour, you know, and then rushes here through 1 minute. The denominator, the number of hours, becomes very large, and the expected fatality rate is low for this blue path. And of course, this is not what we want to have from a path. Essentially, by wasting time in a low density area and this way increasing the flight time, well, it's kind of the license to go through the high population density and maybe have a fatality. I will say, well, okay, maybe one fatality happened here, but I was flying for so long, for a million flight hours, or maybe 1 flight hour, or whatever. So by lengthening the path, theoretically, if you just look at the EFR blindly, you are lowering it, and that's probably not good. Okay, so I'm critical of SORA, but I'm also critical of HFRM, high fidelity risk modeling, quantitative risk assessment applied blindly. So I think that's the last slide. Yes, we have about 5 minutes before the end. So if nothing else, hopefully you will remember that the regulations are risk-based. All you need to do to approve your operation is to prove that the risk is low, has acceptable risk, whatever it means, depending on the methods and so on. There are several ways to prove that your risk is low and hence get the approval for the operation. Several quantitative methods or derivatives from one another, at least in Europe. There are also other methods elsewhere. There are quantitative methods. I would say quantitative methods are the same everywhere, all over the world. I mean, if you speak about EFR, it's EFR, it's number of fatalities per flying hour. But anyway, so if you can prove you are safe, you should get the approval. It's interesting that, well, when you look at the acronym SORA, then S stands for specific. And of course, one way to treat this word specific is to say, well, it's about specific category, right? So the drones have this open, specific, and I don't want to say concrete, open, specific, and certified categories. We don't speak about certified. That's more or less like airplanes. We don't speak about open. That's more or less hobbyist. Not much to approved, not much risk if you follow the rules. We did look into some of the rules. So we mostly speak about the specific category. That's kind of the most interesting and probably the widest category. But again, if you look at this S in SORA and it says specific, well, maybe this specific doesn't refer to the specific category. Maybe it refers to the operation, specific operation or concrete operation, this particular operation risk assessment. Because come to think of it, well, SORA is kind of approving scenarios. So if you're flying BVLOS over unpopulated area, blah, blah, and there are no aircraft in the vicinity, no controlled airspace, then more or less you have this scenario that can be approved here and then also in other places. But why approving only scenarios? In principle, every concrete and specific operation, no matter in which category, every concrete operation should be approved or disapproved depending on what risk it has. High risk, disapproved, low risk, approved. So yeah, it's still the question, at least to me, why are we really trying to approve scenarios? It's nice that you can approve scenarios, and it's super nice that they have these standard scenarios. I think they've had 2. Last time I've seen, maybe they got it up to 3 or maybe 4. Anyway, so there is a handful of standard scenarios that they already prepared for you, and if you want to operate, then the process is easy. So I'm not saying that scenarios is bad, but in principle, it could be nicer, maybe nicer, to approve every concrete, every specific operation. And I'm not sure what the specific operation risk assessment creators, the JARUS, maybe they also had this feeling. In fact, what I did find in SORA, that it says that it's particularly suited, but not limited to specific operations. So even though specific operations risk assessment methodology, well, looks like you can apply it also outside specific. I don't know if you really want to apply SORA to open. Why do you need SORA? Open is open. That's why it is open. Kind of fly, just obey the rules. I haven't heard that certified operations were approved based to SORA, but from this particular quote, it seems that you in principle may do it also for other categories. But that's where my knowledge ends. And that's also where we are ending the slides, just to say that, yes, I suspect there will be, I bet there will be new versions of SORA. It cannot be the end. Whether it will be good or bad, I trust it will be better than the current one. There are also other methodologies. So Eurocontrol developed a more holistic Medusa risk assessment methodology, taking into account more things, as we discussed also in this set of slides. SORA doesn't take into account risk with other unmanned aircraft, and so on and so forth. So, and there are also other methodologies outside of Europe. So SORA is not the end. Keep your eyes open, but for now, that's all I wanted to say about risk assessment.